everybody, and welcome back to the podcast and YouTube channel with no pre-recorded introduction. That's the way we roll here at the Showing Up to Life, because you know what? We're showing up every day, right? So we'll go with that. It is still a little challenging for me to shift from being, joyous little MC guy to being, kind of talking about some of the other stuff that we talk about. But, if you don't mind, I don't mind. We'll work it out, right? So speaking of shift and a pivot, so, I need to address something in today's segment. I gave my word yesterday that I would do this, but that's not why I'm doing it. It's something that needs to be addressed. So I got a comment on the video from the other day where I talked about the story of my son and I walking along the street and encountering a person of color, and that I performed a very implicit, meaning unconscious, act of microaggression, right? Now, microaggressions are, the little things that we do that we, again, mostly unaware of, if not 100% unaware of, that are real things that people, the people of color with whom we're reacting in these microaggressions, they notice it, right? And it's very, very hurtful. So this is a very, very important thing to understand for all of us, people in this country, and especially in America, us white people, because we are privileged that we don't have to deal with microaggressions. We don't deal with people pulling their son closer to them as we're passing them. We don't deal with people locking their doors when we walk by them. We don't deal with, people sort of moving into the corner of an elevator and this kind of thing, right? And again, these are things that most people do without knowledge of doing it. But the people who are on the other side of it, they do see it, and it hurts. And this is why it's really important to bring awareness to this, because as we bring awareness to it, then we can stop doing it. It's a very simple process, right? So, but that's not what I need to talk to you about here today. What I need to talk to you about here today is the fact that that during that video the other day, I mentioned that, that my implicit the microaggression that happened, again, was very implicit for me. And I believe that it came from, the very racist parents that I had. Now, in my discussion, as I was talking, now, first of all, I want you all to know, like, these videos are all completely unscripted, right? Like, I am not here, like, parsing every word and planning out everything I'm going to say. It's really improvised. And so, so I say things sometimes that maybe I don't 100% mean. Maybe, in retrospect or on, sort of further consideration, I wouldn't say some of the things that I say. And I think this is a case of one of those. So when I was in the video the other day, I said that my parents were racist, but I think I said not outwardly racist. And I haven't watched the video again. I haven't had time. I will at some point, but I do remember this is what the person was saying. She, the person who commented on the YouTube channel, and I'm not going to name her. I'm not going to name them. They said that the jokes are outwardly racist, independent of the intention. And I think that's a very good point. And I stand corrected in that, because I think in the video what I had said was that my parents were not outwardly racist, but were, they had the racist jokes, right? And I still do believe that, I outwardly racist, I think maybe that was an incorrect terminology. And I really appreciate this person bringing this to my attention, because this is something that I've learned now, right? And this is we're going to get into what this means in terms of mindfulness and self-compassion in a second. But I'm very, very grateful that I learned this lesson here, right? Because I've always seen it as sort of, maybe the proper term is, implicitly racist as opposed to explicitly racist, right? But it is still outwardly racist, right? And again, I think what I was talking about when I say explicit and implicit, even just now, I mean in the intention. And what this person, I believe, was calling out is that the intention doesn't really matter. I mean, I guess it's irrelevant to the experience of the person of color, right? So those jokes that people say, right? And I think part of it also was that, my parents would never say one of those jokes in the presence of a person of color, right? That's also kind of part of, I think, where my mind was going. But still, it's a very important thing to understand that it does not matter the intentions. What matters is the outward expression, because that's what hurts. And that's the same thing as the microaggression. So really this person is calling me out on something that I was already calling myself out on. And there it was, you see, and this is how entangled and sticky this racism stuff can get. Right. And there are times I had a conversation with a dear friend, right around the time of the George Floyd murder and all the protests that were happening. And I was seeking out to talk to as many people as I could about this, but whether they were people of color or white people, specifically not talking to people of color. And this is something also very important, that we can't go to people of color and say, hey, explain to me how to be less racist. Explain to me what you feel. That's not fair. We can't put them on the spot with that, because they already deal with all these microaggressions all the time, right? So it's up to us to do our research. Now, that means talking amongst ourselves about this stuff is more important than talking to people of color about racism. So in other words, talk to your white uncles, talk to your white friends, talk to your white parents who are making those jokes, because that's what matters, right? And so anyway, I'm true, but again, I was talking to a friend as I started saying, a year and a half ago, whenever that was, that all that was going on with George Floyd and that tragic situation that happened, the tragic murder of that innocent person, right? That he's a human being, right? He did not deserve to die that way. Right. And so in the wake of all that, again, it was, I think, nationally, just collectively in humanity, we just wanted to understand this more, And I was talking to somebody who is a person of color and also somebody who does the same kind of work that I do. She's actually much more advanced in her meditation. I mean, she's like an ordained, nun in Buddhism, I think. She's definitely further advanced than me. And even she said that there's that this racism, it's so entangled and so sticky that we feel like we have some, like we got it. Oh, I understand. But then it's gone, because it's so entangled, right? As I just explained to you, right? Here I am calling myself out on the implicit bias. And yet in calling myself out on the implicit bias, there was another implicit bias under that was now thankfully called out by one of my watchers and listeners. And I really just want you to know how grateful I am to you for calling me out. You know who you are. I want you to know how grateful I am for that, because it's important. And so this is where, self-compassion comes in, right? Because, these things that we're dealing with, right, are really, really deep, but they're also very deeply embodied in our psyche, right? Whether that's the individual psyche, whether it's the collective psyche of society, or, and most prevalently, the psyche of the family. Right? Which, as we know, the psyche of the family is something that's passed down from generation to generation, right? And so it's not that, my parents were the ones that started being racist, right? They grew up with parents who were racist because they grew up with parents who were racist because they grew up with parents who were racist because they grew up with parents who were racist. So it's a line, it's a linear thing that weaves its way through generation after generation after generation after generation, and it's because of those implicit biases that it happens. Right? When I say that my parents were not outwardly racist, what I mean is that they would never use the N-word. What I mean is that they would never, outwardly or intentionally, and really not out, but intentionally, they would never treat somebody differently because of the color of their skin, right? And that's intentionally and consciously. But again, beneath that is this implicit this implicit bias that happens, that exists, that is, the problem, right? Because again, my parents would sit there and say, no, 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 no. I would never say the N word ever. Not even not even among us, just our family. I would never say that word because it's an ugly, horrible word and the connotations are just absolutely filthy. But yet, and it's not like I want to make sure that this is accurate and clear just from my own perspective, right? Not that it matters that much. It doesn't change anything really. But the jokes that I refer to are not like, hey, let me tell you a bunch of these jokes I just heard that are all, racist and we'll all get a good laugh. What I'm talking about is like a reactive kind of joke. Like something happens and somebody says, oh, well, they're all like that kind of thing, referring to an ethnic group of some kind, right? Again, the person who commented is 100% correct, and I'm not trying to argue that at all. That is racist. That is outwardly racist. But it's implicitly outwardly racist. But that makes it more important. And that's why I'm so grateful that this person called me out on this, because it's so important for us to understand that. Right? Because it is those little jokes, it is those little microaggressions that our children are watching. And that's what children are doing, right? I talk about this in this podcast all the time. Between the age of birth and about 8 years old, all you are doing is soaking up everything that you see. And there's a hierarchical process to that. The first people you're looking at are your caregivers. The second people you're looking at are your sort of extended family. The third level are the teachers and the coaches. The fourth level is all your friends and their parents and all that kind of stuff. The fifth level is just the world at large, right? And so the point is that if you have parents and you have uncles and you even have teachers who are making these little seemingly innocuous jokes and comments and implicit microaggressions, that's what children are filing away, and that becomes their operating system. That becomes the thing, that becomes their worldview, right? So to me as an 8-year-old kid, right, it was normal to make jokes like that. And I used to make them. I used to make them all the time. I remember one time sitting with a family I didn't know was Jewish, and I made like 5 jokes about Jews being cheap. I was 12 years old. I'll forgive myself for that because it was, I was part of the context of the culture, right? But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt the people I was sitting with. It hurt them a lot. And it was effed up that I did that. And it's not okay. And so self-compassion in this context is very, very important here, right? Because self-compassion is what let me read that comment the other day and not defend myself and not feel like, because some of this stuff, like when you start really getting into this, you're shaking the core of who you are, right? Because who you are literally is who your parents and grandparents were, right? Their nervous system is your nervous system. So literally, you are a product of all of those people before you. And so if you're now saying that those people are horrible, racist people, that is a very, very difficult thing for people to acknowledge. And so, and that's part of the problem, right? Because we just perpetuate the cycles. Because yes, this person, again, I want to just heap praise on this person who commented this video. I'm just so grateful because the problem is that exactly, right? That it's easier for me to just roll my eyes and say, oh, that's just my parents doing their thing, because I've done my own healing, my own understanding, and I'm okay. So, I don't, let them just be old racist people. It doesn't matter. No, that's not okay. That is not okay. Because it just shows how there's layers upon layers upon layers and upon layers of this implicit racism or this racial bias that we have. And as I said, I feel like I've done the work. I feel like I've done a lot of work. To be sure, mindfulness has been shown to reduce racial bias, to reduce all implicit biases, because you're bringing more awareness. So I've been practicing this for 10 years now. I grew up in New York City where my best friend in first grade couldn't even speak English. We just communicated via pizza, like literally. His name was Tony. I used to call him Tony Baloney, and he would laugh his ass off. He didn't even know what I was talking about. That was the extent of our relationship. I mean, I've been exposed to all of it, and I feel like I can wake up in the morning and say, hey, I'm not racist. And of course I'm not. I don't have a racist intention in my soul. But yet I just showed you the other day that I performed an act of implicit racial bias. And then furthermore, by diminishing the level of the jokes that my parents tell, again, that is my implicit racial bias. And again, I'm a guy who's worked on this for 10 long years. That's not everybody who's worked on this for 10 years. And so that's why it's very, very important for us to be vigilant and to call it out when we see it. Including calling out when we see people say, oh, it's just my parents saying jokes. No. That's not all it is. That is centuries of racism live in those jokes. And it needs to be called out every single time. Even if it hurts the other person. Because it doesn't hurt as much as a whip hurts, I'll tell you that much. All right, folks, I hope that, I'm out on a limb here talking about this because this is not a political, podcast here or YouTube channel. And I beg forgiveness if I've ruffled any feathers but if it means I lose some viewers and listeners, I'm okay with that. Okay, because this is bigger than me, and it's bigger than this YouTube channel. It's bigger than my coaching business. It's bigger than everything. And we got to do better. We really do, because we're not done with the work yet. We are not. And there's so many people out there who will tell you that we live in a post-racist society, and that is just BS. Okay, just look at what happened with George Floyd. We do not live in a post-racist society. We might live in a post-racial intentional society, maybe, at least parts of us are, but we do not live in a post-racial society. And we have to acknowledge that. And we have to keep working towards that point where we are in a post-racial society. And that means, like I said the other day, replacing the hate and the ignorance with empathy and compassion. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this segment, or I guess you didn't really enjoy it, but all right, I'm going to go blow my nose, and I'll come back for the next segment in a few minutes. All right, everybody, welcome back. Sorry. Well, I'm not sorry, but I definitely got a little emotional at the end of that segment. And yeah, I mean, it's an emotional thing. And, this is one of the things that compassion, in general, and self-compassion specifically, but as you all know, I don't really usually, I distinguish between self-compassion and compassion only for the purpose of language communication, right? Because there's really not a distinction between the two, right? And that's what this is all about, right? Like when we notice a microaggression, like I talked about in the last segment and in a video the other day, what we're noticing is the suffering of another human being, right? And now again, without compassion, we could still correct microaggressions just as a point of, social nicety or, social etiquette, if you will, right? But that misses the point, right? The point is that there's a lot of suffering that happens, that's been happening for centuries. Abysmal, just horrific suffering that's been happening for centuries. And when we practice compassion, that's what we see. We see that suffering. And we see that the unfairness of that suffering, and we see the pain and the brutality of that suffering. And that's what changes things, right? When we can really see it like that. Because if we're just doing it like because of a sensitivity training that we did at work, or if we're just doing it, like I said, my parents, they would never make the kind of joke out at, Walmart that they would make it around the Thanksgiving table, right? That's the point. Right. So if it's just this sort of, cognitive thing that we do just because it's the right thing to do, well, then that's a thin veneer. And that doesn't change the microaggressions, right? So anyway, I want to talk about another thing that I got called out on. This one was completely different. So I do some I do some videos on TikTok these days. My kids turned me on to this app, and I got turned on to it by my daughter literally sending me. There's a guy on there named Cole who does these astrology things, but not astrology just in terms of the zodiac signs, right? Like, oh, if you're dating a Capricorn, that kind of thing. So my 12-year-old daughter is like so into that stuff. And so she would send me all these videos, and I'd like look at a couple other videos and be like, wow, there's a lot of people out there doing stuff, And I was like, I wonder if people are talking about the kind of stuff I talk about. And lo and behold, they are. And so not many mindfulness people, but certainly, or compassion people, but certainly a lot of people talking about trauma, a lot of people talking about, mental health issues at large. You even have like licensed therapists who are just giving free advice all day long on TikTok. It's pretty awesome. It's a really awesome platform that way. And so I produce little 60-second videos. I try to do them every day. I'm not very, I don't succeed in doing them every day. And I also do like a little you can do either 60-second or 3-minute videos, actually 15-second, 60-second, or 15 or 3-minute videos. And so I do a 3-minute video of a mindfulness practice where I just kind of walk through a mini meditation. I try to do those every day. Again, I'm not successful every day, but they're pretty fun. So if you're on TikTok, or if you want to join TikTok, hit me up, find me on there. Okay, it's Art Burns Coaching. Oh no, I'm sorry, it's Art Mindful on there. And so I do a lot of videos, again, I do pretty much the videos I do on there are like a condensed version of the video that I do here, right? So I told that story about the implicit bias. I had to do a 3-minute video for that. There's no way to get that story into a minute. I tried. But, so 3 minutes there became 15 minutes here, right? And so I just elaborate and go deeper into the kind of concepts and stuff. Which is a great challenge for me in communication, right? How to communicate this whole thing into a 60-second thing. It's very, very challenging. It's really beautifully challenging, actually. And so every time you see me do a video about self-compassion here, I'm pretty much doing a video about self-compassion there. And the other day, I did one, and a person replied with a really strange comment. It was something along the lines of, like, what you're doing is teaching people to be proud, and, just like he was like, being in love with yourself is a sign of pride, and that's a bad thing. You shouldn't be teaching people to do that. And he was like blasting me a bit, Now, again, in the past, I would have been, got right in there, giving it right back to him, but because I've practiced my compassion, my self-compassion, my mindfulness, I was allowing myself to, okay, hold on a second, take in what this person is saying, right? And try to understand where this person is coming from before reacting to it. If I understand what he's saying, then I can respond to him. And so I allowed myself to sort of digest his words and sort of, empathy has many different forms. I have 5 or 6 different forms. But one of the forms of empathy is called perspective taking, right? When you can put yourself in the other person's shoes, right? And so I did that. And I put myself in his shoes and tried to understand my message through his point of view. Now, of course, in order for me to understand his point of view, I could use some extra information. So I went on his TikTok profile and I looked and I see that he's a very religious person, right? And so he was, he was very much coming at it from a place of religion, Christianity religion. And once I realized that, I said, oh, okay, wait a minute. I can kind of understand how he thinks that I'd be saying that. And the thing is that self-compassion is not ever about feeling that you're better than anyone else. And that's what he was kind of implying with his criticism, is that, pride is when we feel like, oh, I'm so good, That's not what self-compassion is. Self-compassion is actually the exact opposite of that. Self-compassion is really beautifully enveloped in a very simple phrase that Dr. Kristin Neff, who's one of the foremost authorities on self-compassion, she uses this term a lot when she talks about self-compassion, which is, there but for the grace of God go I, right? And what that means is that when you see somebody who's, suffering, homeless or poor, or, suffering racial, bias, or suffering violence, or suffering whatever, right? Self-compassion is the ability to say, if things went differently in my life, I could be that person, right? That person, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that person. That person just had certain things happen to them that wound them up in this condition, in this position. And so self-compassion is the opposite of pride. It's actually anti-pride. It's actually saying that I am no better than anybody else. I'm just more fortunate. And this speaks to racism too, right? Again, the whole belief of racism is that for some reason, because somebody has a color skin, that makes them inferior in some way. Now, of course, biologically speaking, this is just not even true. I mean, there's nothing. The only difference between somebody's, who has dark skin and somebody who has light skin is a hormone called melanin, right? That's it. That's the only difference. That's the only difference. There's no genetic coding that's different. There's no organs that are different. There's no muscles that are different. We all have the same amount of teeth, the same amount of eyes, the same amount of neurons in our brain, the same amount of muscles, the same amount of bones, the same amount of everything. And there's fluctuations, of course. People have different body types and different, hair types and eye color and all that kind of stuff. And that exists within each grouping, right? Just like there's white people who are tall and there's black people who are tall. There's white people who are short. There's black people who are short, right? There's no difference. And so there's no better or worse than anybody. And so I want to make sure that you all understand that, because maybe somebody out there doesn't understand that, like this gentleman on TikTok. And so let me tell you how I responded to him, and it's really a beautiful thing. Again, I took a couple of days to respond because I wanted to make sure that I was coming from a place of kindness and compassion, right? Not from a place of defensiveness and being called out and being, trying to worry about what other people are going to think about me and stuff like that, right? I made sure that I wasn't coming from that place, but instead coming from a place of empathy and compassion. And so the way that I responded to this person was, first I said, thank you for commenting. And I can see why you feel that way. And I'm sorry that I that I may have said something that misled you in that way. But let me tell you what I really mean here. And I didn't use the there but for the grace of God go I. I used a different quote that's from the Bible that I just happen to know is from the Bible because somebody else told me, not because I'm that familiar with the Bible. But another actually a Franciscan brother who is very prominent in the mindfulness community. His name is Brother David Steindl-Rast. And he's from Belgium or Lithuania or something like that. Amazing person if you want to look him up. But anyway, he said, he quoted, I think it was, I don't remember which biblical episode it was. I want to say it was the Sermon on the Mount, but I don't know. And again, I'm not that familiar with it. So anybody who is familiar with the Bible, please comment and tell me where this quote comes from, right? But the quote that the good brother was saying is that in the original Hebrew text of the Old Testament, which I guess means that it couldn't have been Sermon on the Mount, right? That's a New Testament thing, I think, right? So it's in the Old Testament, right? There was a point at which, a crowd of people all felt as though God talked directly to them, right? Not just like we all heard him say, no, but he said, hey, Art, you know, this, you know, he said he was speaking to me, like he used my name kind of thing in this story, which is quite beautiful. And so anyway, the quote I guess it's changed in the translation. I think in the translation it says, love thy neighbor like thyself. But in the original Hebrew, it doesn't say that. It says, love thy neighbor as thyself. And that's a big difference, right? Because what you're acknowledging there is that your neighbor is yourself. And you are your neighbor. Not just that you're like each other, because that's true, right? We are all one. We're just different expressions of the same consciousness. It gets a little deep, and we can talk about that a different time, right? But the idea, I just want to finish this story about this beautiful person on TikTok. So I brought up that quote. I said, this is what I'm thinking, right? Like, this is the way that I'm approaching self-compassion when I explain it on my videos. I said, it's in line with the quote, love thy neighbor as thyself. And then I just left it at that. I walked away from it. Wouldn't you know that like 2 days later, the guy started following me on TikTok, right? And so that's the thing, right? Sometimes it's just a question of meeting someone on their own kind of language, right? And that also comes from mindfulness and compassion and kindness and empathy and all of it, including acceptance. Right? Because it's important that we, again, I could have just dismissed this guy, right? I could have said, he doesn't know what he's talking about, whatever. He's just a religious freak. I don't have to worry about him. He's all confused. I'll just let him think whatever he wants to think. Or more likely, again, from my past, I would have said, you think you're, what would Jesus say with what you're saying right now kind of thing, somehow try to cut him down a little bit, right? And that's what self-compassion does, right? Because again, it's not about me being better than you. It's never about me being better than you. And in fact, it's about, because that's something we do as another implicit bias, is that we try to make other people, we push other people down so that we feel superior. That's how we gain our sense of self-esteem or self-worth or whatever, right? But self-compassion doesn't do that. Self-compassion goes the other way. Self-compassion says no, there but for the grace of God go I, right? You and I are no different than each other. And just because you didn't understand this does not mean that I get to dismiss you, right? Because that's going to be bad for me and bad for you. So instead, I have to take a moment. I have to really try to see it from your place. I have to see that your statement is coming from something that made you suffer. Just like the video that I made that somebody commented. She was commenting from a place of suffering. And so my compassion has to let me see that and say, yes, you're right. I get told all the time nowadays, like on Facebook, people are like, you're not arguing? Like, how your ability of self-reflection is amazing. Yeah, it is. Because it's practiced. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode today. It's definitely not a usual one. And again, I hope that, I hope I didn't turn anybody. Well, I mean, I hope that you all received the message with the love and kindness in which it was intended, and with the spirit of, conciliation and reconciliation with which it was intended. And I hope you're able to view it with that kind of openness, even if you don't like the message. Okay. But again, if it means I lose a few viewers or subscribers in any way, I can't let that stop me, because this is just too important. All right, everybody, I wish you well. I'll be back again tomorrow. And and thank you again for everyone who ever comments on any of my content. It really, really helps, okay? Because as you see, I mean, these are two examples where it's a community process here, right? It's not just me. It's me, it's you, and it's we. Right? As Dan Siegel says. All right, everybody. I wish you well. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.